tarnished pride, the rain pelted against the windows of Rosemary and Thyme, the gentle drumming almost drowning out the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Zoe Winters wiped her hands on her apron and surveyed her nearly empty restaurant with a mixture of pride and concern. 6 months since opening, and each day was still a struggle. But this place, with its mismatched chairs, hand-painted murals, and recipes passed down through generations, was hers. "Another slow night," said Jasmine, Zoe's sous chef and oldest friend, leaning against the counter. "Hey, it'll pick up," Zoe replied with more confidence than she felt. "People just need to discover us." The bell above the door chimed, and both women turned to see a tall figure shaking raindrops from an umbrella. Even before he removed his tailored coat, Zoe knew this man wasn't their usual clientele. Everything about him, from his perfectly trimmed beard to his Italian leather shoes, screamed wealth and power. "Good evening," Zoe called out. "Professional smile in place. Table for one?" The man's eyes, a cool gray that reminded her of storm clouds, scanned the restaurant critically. "Not dining. Not Dominic Reed of Reed Enterprises." Said it as though she should recognize the name. When she didn't react, his mouth tightened slightly. "I'd like to speak with the owner." Looking at her, Zoe said, extending her hand. Zoe Winters, chef and proprietor. Dominic hesitated before shaking her hand, his grip firm but brief. "Perfect. I'll be direct, Ms. Winters. This area is undergoing significant development. My company has purchased several properties on this block, and we're interested in acquiring yours as well." Jasmine shot Zoe a worried glance before retreating to the kitchen, leaving them alone except for the elderly couple finishing their dessert in the corner. "I'm not selling," Zoe said simply. Dominic smiled, not warmly, but with practiced charm. "You haven't heard my offer? The offer doesn't matter. This restaurant isn't for sale." He pulled out a chair uninvited and sat down, gesturing for her to join him. When she remained standing, something flickered across his face. Perhaps at not being immediately obeyed. "Ms. Winters, I understand emotional attachments, but this is business. Your restaurant is barely breaking even. Yes, I've done my research. The neighborhood is changing. Within a year, you'll likely be forced to close anyway." "Is that a threat?" Zoe asked, crossing her arms. "It's reality. I'm offering you a dignified exit, 3 times your initial investment." The elderly couple was watching now, the woman's phone discreetly pointed in their direction. Zoe felt heat rising to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. "Mr. Reed, my restaurant isn't just an investment. It's my dream, my heritage, and the future I'm building. It's not for sale at any price." Dominic stood, towering over her. His expression hardened as he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Perhaps this will change your mind." He tossed it onto the table, where it landed with a soft thud. "That's a preliminary offer, along with a summary of your financial situation. Review it, then call me when you're ready to be reasonable." The envelope sat between them like a challenge. Without breaking eye contact, Zoe picked it up, walked to the front counter where a jar labeled Staff Education Fund stood, and dropped the unopened envelope inside. "Staff is saving for continuing education," she said calmly. "Your paper will be more useful there than in my hands." The elderly woman gasped softly. Dominic's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed genuinely caught off guard, and his expression settled into something unreadable, but ultimately futile. "I'll be in touch, Ms. Winters." He turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, your coq au vin has too much time. It overwhelms the wine." The door closed behind him with a final sounding click, leaving Zoe standing in the middle of her empty restaurant, heart pounding with indignation and a strange, unwelcome curiosity about the man who had just tried to buy her dreams. Outside, Dominic Reed sat in his car, rain streaming down the windows. For the first time in years, someone had refused his money, had looked him in the eye and chosen principle over profit. Pulled out his phone, did a quick search for Zoe Winters' chef, and began to read, already planning his next move. Unexpected returns. 3 days after their confrontation, Dominic Reed returned to Rosemary and Thyme during the dinner rush. Zoe spotted him immediately, his expensive suit standing out among her regular customers like a wolf among sheep. He was alone, seated at a corner table, studying the menu with unusual intensity. Your admirer is back, Jasmine whispered, nudging Zoe as she plated a steaming bowl of mushroom risotto. He's not an admirer. He's a predator, Zoe replied, though she couldn't deny the slight acceleration of her pulse. Probably here to intimidate me. Want me to spit in his food? Jasmine offered with mock seriousness. We don't waste good ingredients on bad people, Zoe said, managing a smile. I'll handle this. She approached his table with professional composure, notepad in hand. Mr. Reed, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Dominic looked up, his stormy eyes meeting hers. Something in his expression seemed different, less calculated perhaps. Ms. Winters, I came for dinner this time. Our coq au vin has too much time, as I recall. Corner of his mouth twitched. I'll try something else. Recommendations? He asked after a moment of silence. Zoe studied him, trying to decipher his game. The wild mushroom risotto is our specialty. Then that's what I'll have, and a glass of your best red. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. The envelope in your tip jar. Did you open it? No, she said honestly. My staff did. They're using it for a culinary workshop next month. Something flashed across his face, surprise, perhaps even respect. Good. Money should be used, not hoarded. Throughout the evening, Zoe caught herself watching him. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. More strangely, he engaged with other diners, complimenting a child's drawing at the next table, discussing wine with an elderly couple she recognized. As regulars, when the restaurant emptied, Dominic remained, nursing a glass of cognac. Zoe approached his table again. We're closing soon, she said, less coldly than she'd intended. Of course, he nodded, then gestured to the chair opposite him. Join me for a moment. Against her better judgment, Zoe sat down. Up close, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, the slight shadow of fatigue beneath his confident exterior. Your restaurant, he began, it's more than I initially understood, meaning the food is exceptional. The atmosphere is genuine, and your customers don't just eat here, they belong here. Zoe crossed her arms. Is this a new negotiation tactic? Dominic shook his head, surprising her. No tactics tonight, just observation. Closed his notebook. Your risotto was perfect, by the way. High praise from someone who critiqued my coq au vin before tasting it. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I was being deliberately provocative. An old habit when I don't get my way. Does that happen often? Not getting your way? Almost never, he admitted, studying her with newfound curiosity. Which is why your restaurant interests me. Shouldn't. Work this location. Your prices, the eclectic menu, but it does. I want to understand why. Because it has a soul, Mr. Reed. Something your premium bistros and corporate restaurants will never have. Instead of being offended, Dominic leaned forward. Tell me about that soul. And surprisingly, she did. She told him about learning, too. Cook at her grandmother's side. About working double shifts at chain restaurants to save for culinary school. About the community garden where she sourced many of her ingredients. She spoke of her vision. Not just a restaurant, but a gathering place for a neighborhood in transition, where both longtime residents and newcomers could break bread together. Dominic listened with unexpected attention. When she finished, he asked thoughtful questions about her business model, her supplier relationships, her marketing strategy. Their conversation shifted from confrontational to collaborative. And Zoe found herself forgetting momentarily that this man had tried to buy her out just days ago. As he rose to leave, Dominic hesitated. I'd like to come back tomorrow. There's something I want to show you. Another offer, Zoe asked, wariness returning. No, a possibility? After he left, Jasmine emerged from the kitchen. Well, is he still trying to destroy us? Zoe stared at the door, confusion swirling within her. I'm not sure what he's trying to do anymore. The next evening, Dominic arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Instead of his usual suit, he wore dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that softened his sharp edges. He looked almost approachable. I've been researching the neighborhood, he said without preamble, spreading maps and documents across the table. Not just for development potential, but for what it is now. Together, they bent over his research demographic shifts, business patterns, community needs. Dominic pointed out market gaps Zoe hadn't considered: the lack of cooking classes for neighborhood children, the potential for weekend farmers markets, the untapped demand for private event spaces. Your restaurant could be the anchor for all of this, he said, eyes alight with something that looked remarkably like passion. Not by selling, but by expanding. Expanding, Zoe repeated, caught between suspicion and intrigue. I can barely keep one location afloat. That's because you're trying to do everything alone. His hand moved toward hers, then stopped just short of touching. What if you had a partner? The word hung between them, laden with possibilities neither had anticipated when they first met. Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle and persistent. But inside Rosemary and Thyme, something new was taking root. Broken walls, you can't seriously be considering this, Jasmine said, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. The man tried to buy us out a week ago, Zoe sighed, adjusting the flame under a simmering pot. 2 weeks had passed since Dominic first proposed their partnership, and he'd been at the restaurant almost daily since, sometimes dining, sometimes working quietly in the corner, sometimes engaging with customers as if he belonged there. People can change, Zoe said, though her own doubts lingered. Or at least, they can show different sides of themselves. Men like him don't change, Jasmine insisted. They adapt to get what they want. The kitchen door swung open and Dominic appeared, looking uncharacteristically casual in a Henley and dark jeans. Am I interrupting? Jasmine gave him a look that clearly said yes before returning to her chopping. Zoe wiped her hands on her apron. We're prepping for dinner service. Brought something, he said, holding up a worn, leather-bound book. A peace offering for your skeptical sous chef. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, but didn't stop working. It's my grandmother's recipe book, he explained, placing it carefully on a clean section of counter. I thought you might find some inspiration. The gesture was so unexpected that both women paused. Zoe opened the book to find handwritten recipes, notes in the margins, food stains on well-used pages. It was intimate, personal. Nothing like the calculated businessman who had first walked into their restaurant. You cook? Jasmine asked, finally breaking her silence. Not anymore, Dominic admitted. But I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen. It was the only place where... He stopped, seeming to catch himself revealing too much. Where what? Zoe prompted gently. He hesitated, then continued. Where things made sense? My parents were always working or fighting. The kitchen was different. There were rules, processes. Actions had predictable results. He gave a self-conscious smile. It's probably why I became so fixated on control in my adult life. The admission created a crack in the wall Zoe had built around her perception of him. She found herself wanting to know more. It's about the boy who found refuge in a kitchen before becoming the man who built empires. Later that evening, after the last customers had left, Zoe found Dominic sitting at the bar, nursing a whiskey and reviewing spreadsheets. She poured herself a glass and sat beside him. Why are you really here, Dominic? She asked directly. Is this still about acquiring my restaurant? He closed his laptop, turning to face her fully. It started that way, he admitted. But now, I'm not sure. That's not a very businessman-like answer. No, it's not. He rotated his glass slowly, watching the amber liquid catch the light. My life has been. It's predictable for a long time. Identify target, acquire, transform, profit, repeat. It's efficient, successful, and utterly empty. And this, whatever this is, isn't empty. This is the first time in years I've felt. He searched for the word ... present, not just going. Through motions. The vulnerability in his admission caught her off guard. Zoe had expected many things from Dominic Reed. Intimidation, perhaps even seduction, but not honesty. My father died when I was 19, she found herself saying. Heart attack in the middle of his shift at the factory. Never got to see Italy, even though cooking authentic Italian food was his passion. He was always waiting for more money, for the right time, for permission to pursue his dream. She took a sip of whiskey, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. That's why I opened this place when everyone said it was too risky. Some dreams can't wait. And some people forget how to dream at all, Dominic replied quietly. Their eyes met, and Zoe saw past his polished exterior to something raw and searching. For the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the connection forming between them, tentative and unexpected, but undeniably real. Over the following days, their conversations deepened. Dominic shared stories of ruthless business dealings. He now regretted of relationships sacrificed on the altar of success. Zoe spoke of her struggles as a female chef, of almost losing the restaurant during its first winter, the community that rallied around her when she couldn't make rent. They worked side by side, Dominic bringing his business acumen to streamline operations, Zoe teaching him to reconnect with food as something more than fuel or profit. He started coming earlier, staying later. Customers began to recognize him, to greet him by name. One evening, as thunderstorms raged outside, they found themselves alone in the restaurant after hours. Zoe was experimenting with a new dessert, while Dominic calculated projections for the expansion they were cautiously planning. "Try this," she said, offering him a spoonful of warm chocolate budino topped with sea salt. He tasted it, closing his eyes as the flavors melded on his tongue. When he opened them again, there was wonder in his gaze. "It's perfect." "Not quite," she said, reaching up to brush a smudge of chocolate from the corner of his mouth. Her hand lingered, and suddenly the air between them charged with unspoken possibility. "Zoe," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, the power went out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. Zoe laughed, the tension broken. "Oh, perfect timing." By candlelight, they sat close together, planning and dreaming as the storm raged outside and something equally powerful grew between them, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. Community foundations, the expansion of Rosemary and Thyme, began not with construction, but with conversation. Dominic and Zoe spent weeks meeting with neighborhood residents, local business owners, and community leaders, listening to needs and concerns before finalizing their plans. "This isn't how I usually do business," Dominic admitted, as they walked back to the restaurant after a particularly heated community meeting. "Typically, I make decisions, then manage the consequences." Zoe smiled, noting how the stiffness had gradually left his posture over the past month. "How's that working out for you?" "Slower," he conceded, "but better." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about what you said about creating something with a soul. I think it starts with listening." The transformation began gradually. First came the cooking classes, weekend sessions where neighborhood children learned to make pasta from scratch and elderly residents shared traditional recipes from their cultures. Then the back patio was converted into a small urban garden, tended by volunteers and supplying fresh herbs for the restaurant. Dominic surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all, by rolling up his sleeves and getting his hands dirty. He taught business workshops for aspiring local entrepreneurs, installed shelving for the new cookbook exchange, and spent hours listening to the stories of longtime residents who remembered when the neighborhood was both more prosperous and more connected. "You're different here," Zoe observed one evening, as they shared a bottle of wine after closing. The restaurant had been transformed, the dining area expanded, the kitchen modernized, the menu evolved while maintaining its roots. But the most remarkable transformation had been in Dominic himself. "Different how?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "Less guarded, more alive." She hesitated, then added softly, "More yourself, I think." He considered this, twirling the stem of his wineglass between long fingers. "I'm not sure I knew who that was before." His eyes met hers, warm with something deeper than friendship. "You've shown me possibilities I never considered, such as that success can be measured in relationships, not just returns. That community isn't just a marketing concept, but a living ecosystem." He reached across the table, finally taking her hand in his. "That I could become someone worthy of a woman who wouldn't sell her principles." Zoe felt her heart quicken, both thrilled and terrified by the intensity of her feelings. Their relationship had evolved from adversaries to partners to something much more complex, built on respect, shared purpose, and an attraction that grew stronger with each passing day. "I'm not perfect either," she admitted. "I was so afraid of failing that I almost didn't let you help. Pride can be as dangerous as greed." "We balance each other," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Your heart, my head. Is that all I am to you?" "A heart," she challenged, though her smile took any sting from the words. "No," he said seriously. "You're the compass I didn't. No, I needed." The grand reopening of Rosemary and Thyme coincided with the neighborhood's first community festival, an event that transformed the once quiet street into a vibrant celebration of food, music, and connection. Local artists displayed their work. Musicians performed on a small stage built by volunteers, and the expanded restaurant served as the heart of it all. Dominic stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Zoe moved through the gathering, greeting guests, directing staff, embodying the spirit of the place they had created together. When she caught his eye across the crowded patio, her smile was radiant. Later, as the festival wound down and staff began cleaning up, they found a quiet moment together on the rooftop garden they had planted months earlier. The city lights spread. Before them and above, stars managed to penetrate even the urban glow. "We did it," Zoe said, leaning against the railing beside him. "You did it," Dominic corrected. "Just remove some obstacles." She shook her head. "That's not true. This place what it's becoming, it has both of us in its DNA now." He turned to face her, the moonlight silvering his features. "Zoe, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said weeks." "Go." She felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "The day after I met you, after you put my envelope in that tip jar, made some calls. About buying the entire block." Zoe stiffened. "What?" "I was angry, wounded, determined to prove that everything has a price." His expression was pained with the memory. "But then I came back, and I saw what you had created here, how it mattered, and I couldn't go through with it. So the partnership, the expansion was that your way of making amends at first, perhaps? But then it became something else entirely." He took her hands in his. "It became about building something together, something neither of us could create alone." She should have been angry at the revelation, but instead, Zoe felt a strange sense of completion, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. They had begun as opponents, each representing values the other had rejected. Now they stood united, having learned from one another, having grown together. "From now on," she said firmly, "complete honesty between us." "Complete honesty," he agreed, drawing her closer, starting with this. "I'm in love with you, Zoe Winters. Not with your restaurant, not with this project, but with your courage, your compassion, your unwavering sense of purpose. Under a sky full of possibilities, surrounded by the community they had helped to strengthen." Zoe rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his promise of beginning. A recipe for something neither had dared to imagine before they found each other. Measured in worth 1 year after their partnership began. Dominic stood in the doorway of Rosemary and Thyme, watching the usual Thursday evening bustle with quiet satisfaction. What had once been a struggling restaurant was now the centerpiece of a revitalized neighborhood, not gentrified and sanitized as his original plans would have created, but authentically renewed while preserving its character and community. The original restaurant had expanded to include a culinary school offering scholarships to local youth, marketplace featuring products from neighborhood entrepreneurs, and affordable event spaces that hosted everything from wedding receptions to community organizing meetings. Most importantly, longtime residents remained, benefiting from the growth rather than being displaced by it. "Mr. Reed." A young woman approached him, notepad in hand. "I'm Teresa from the Business Journal. Agreed to an interview about the Rosemary and Thyme model?" "Oh." Dominic smiled. "Actually, you'll want to speak with Ms. Winters. She's the visionary behind all this. I'm just the numbers guy." The reporter looked confused. "But you're Dominic Reed. Your company has transformed dozens of neighborhoods across the country." "And learned something new with this one," he replied, nodding toward the kitchen where Zoe was visible through the pass-through, directing her staff with characteristic focus and energy. "She's in the middle of dinner service, but she'll be available in about an hour." As the reporter made notes, Dominic's phone vibrated. He checked the screen and frowned. It was Malcolm Hayes, his second-in-command and oldest friend, with a message that couldn't wait. In the office they shared above the restaurant, Malcolm paced anxiously. "The board is revolting, Dom. They say you've gone soft. That this community-centered approach is cutting into profits. They're threatening to vote you out at the next shareholders meeting." Dominic absorbed this calmly. I expected as much. The quarterly returns don't show the long-term value we're building. It's more than that. Carmichael Ventures has made an offer to buy your controlling interest. They want to take the company in a more traditional direction. Malcolm handed him a document. The offer is ... substantial. Dominic glanced at the figure, enough wealth to last several lifetimes. A year ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. He set the paper aside without comment. There's something else, Malcolm continued, more hesitant now. They want Rosemary in Time. They see it as the perfect flagship for their new upscale dining concept. They're prepared to make Ms. Winters an offer she can't refuse. At this, Dominic felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Zoe doesn't sell out. Ever. Everyone has a price, Dom. You taught me that. I was wrong. He stood. Decision made. Tell the board I'll address their concerns at the meeting next week. And tell Carmichael thanks, but no thanks. Malcolm shook his head in disbelief. What happened to you? Dominic Reed, I know, would never walk away from a deal like this. Maybe he met someone worth more than money. Dominic looked out the window at the bustling street below, at people gathering, connecting, building something together. Maybe he finally understood the difference between price and value. After Malcolm left, Dominic remained at the window, contemplating the choice before him. He could fight the board, potentially lose everything he'd built over decades, or he could take the offer, walk away wealthy, but knowing he had abandoned the new path he and Zoe had forged together. The door opened behind him and Zoe entered, still in her chef's coat, her face flushed from the kitchen heat. I saw Malcolm leaving. He looked upset. Dominic turned, drinking in the sight of her strong, authentic, uncompromising in all the ways that mattered. The board wants me out. They don't approve of our methods. Our methods? She came to stand beside him, concern in her eyes. You mean the community investment? The profit sharing with employees? The affordable housing initiative? All of it. They want traditional development, luxury retail, high-end residences, maximum return on investment. Zoe was quiet for a moment, processing. What will you do? What do you think I should do? She studied him, seeing past his composed exterior to the conflict within. A year ago, I would have said you'd choose profit without hesitation. Now, ... She took his hand. Now I think you'll choose purpose. But Dominic, this is your company, your life's work. Was he agreed. But I'm building something new now, something better. He hesitated, then added, they want to buy this place too. Turn it into something exclusive. Zoe's laugh was genuine. Well, they can't have it. This isn't just ours anymore, it belongs to everyone who's invested in it. The staff who own shares, the community members on the board, the students with scholarships. We built it that way deliberately. Her certainty steadied him. This was why he loved her unwavering clarity about what mattered. The following week, Dominic stood before the board of Reed Enterprises. Facing the men and women who had once respected him for his ruthless efficiency and remarkable returns, the development model we've implemented at Rosemary and Time represents the future, he told them, his voice steady. Not just ethically, but financially. Community investment creates sustainable growth, customer loyalty, and long-term stability that speculative development can't match. Skeptical faces stared back. At him, the chairman spoke. Impressive speech, Dominic. But the numbers tell a different story. Quarterly profits are down 15%. Look at the annual projections, Dominic countered. At the reduced tenant turnover, the positive press coverage, the community goodwill, intangibles. Someone muttered, no, Dominic said firmly. The foundation of lasting value. But I recognize that many of you disagree. He placed a document on the table. This is my proposal. I'm offering to buy out any shareholders who wish to exit at a premium above current market value. Murmurs rippled through the room. Hey, the chairman leaned forward. You're suggesting a management buyout? Where will you get that kind of capital? I've liquidated most of my personal assets, Dominic replied calmly. And I've secured backing from investors who believe in our new direction. What followed was hours of heated negotiation, culminating in an agreement that would fundamentally reshape Reed Enterprises. Dominic would retain control, but with a smaller, more focused company committed to sustainable, community-centered development. When he finally returned to Rosemary in time that evening, the restaurant was closed, but lights still burned in the kitchen. He found Zoe there, experimenting with new recipes for the seasonal menu change. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up from her work. "It's done," he said simply. "Reed Enterprises will be smaller, but better, more aligned with what we believe in." She wiped her hands and came to him, searching his face. "And you're okay? With that, giving up the empire you built?" Pulled her close. "I didn't give it up. I transformed it just like you transformed me." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I have something to ask you, Zoe. Something I've been considering for months." Her eyes widened as he reached into his pocket and withdrew not a ring, but a key. "What's this?" she asked, taking it cautiously. "The deed to that abandoned theater 3 blocks over. The one you said would make a perfect community arts center." He smiled at her confusion. "I bought it months ago, before all this started with the board. I was waiting for the right moment. But that's not what I thought you were going to." She stopped, a blush rising to her cheeks. Dominic laughed softly. "Did you think I was proposing? Maybe," she admitted. The setup was very dramatic. "When I propose," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, "it won't be with property deeds. But I wanted you to know that whatever happens next with the business, with USI, I'm committed to the vision we've created together." Zoe looked at the key in her palm, then back at the man before hers, so different from the arrogant billionaire who had first walked into her restaurant. In him, she had found not just a partner, but a person who had discovered his own best self through their connection. "I love you," she said simply, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Not for what you can buy or build, but for who you choose to be." Every day, outside the neighborhood they had helped to nurture, continued its evening rhythms, families sharing meals, neighbors checking on elderly residents, students studying in the cafe they had opened together. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, held tight to the understanding that true worth could never be measured in dollars, only in difference made and lives touched. And in the quiet of the kitchen, where their journey had begun, they sealed this knowledge with a kiss that tasted of promise, of purpose, and of a love that had taught them both the true meaning of value.